Tonight on this special edition of Newshour, US President Donald Trump is set to host President Ilham Aliyev of Azerbaijan and Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan for peace talks at the White House on Friday, according to the latest information from anonymous US officials. Now, many major news outlets, including the Washington Post, began reporting yesterday that the meeting would take place at the White House on Friday, August the 8th, all part of an effort to broker a peace deal between the two countries. The report, citing two senior White House officials, indicated that a peace agreement could potentially be announced following the talks. Now, President Trump is expected to hold separate meetings with each leader before bringing them together for a joint session. The move is part of the president's wider push to resolve international conflicts and position himself as a key global mediator. As you would expect, AnewZ will be closely following events as they unfold over the coming 48 hours, and two esteemed colleagues central to that are AnewZ Deputy Editor-in-Chief Orkhan Amashov, who I'm delighted to say joins me in the studio, and our US Correspondent Oubai Shahbandar, who is out and about right now in Washington, DC. Gentlemen, many thanks for being with us. Okay, let's get straight into this then. Orkhan, before we look ahead, can we just look back for those viewers that perhaps may not have such a detailed understanding of what's happened between Azerbaijan and Armenia? Could you give us just some of the fact-based key events of the conflict between the two countries?
Yes, thank you very much, guys. Great to be here. Indeed, to understand what may be signed actually on Friday, we need to understand the context preceding what will happen in a couple of days. Yes, the conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia has been underway for three decades, but effectively since September 2023, when Azerbaijan effectively regained full de facto control over the remainder of Karabakh, the peace process between these two nations has been bilateral. I think it has been bilateral since late 2023, since probably December 2023, when Baku and Yerevan issued a joint statement. And that statement led to Azerbaijan hosting COP29 and many other developments. So Armenian-Azerbaijani cooperation was absolutely key. And then some developments in 2024, meeting at the Munich Security Conference. But we always say the process has been bilateral, but I suppose that Abu Dhabi meeting that took place on the 10th of July was the inception of a proper, full-scale, full-fledged interstate dialogue between Baku and Yerevan, because there was no third party involved at all. Although this meeting is taking place in Washington, I think the process remains bilateral. US is not acting as a mediator. I think US is not a mediator here. US merely providing a venue for these two countries come together. And President Trump's initiative is widely acknowledged by both Baku and Yerevan. There is a potential US role in the context of Zangezur corridor. Azerbaijan also developing its relations with Washington after early 2025. But the one thing should be borne in mind, the process remains bilateral. Secondly, I think that we're not talking about the signing of the agreement on peace and interstate normalization, the text of which was finalized on the 13th of March 2025, but rather some form of a pre-peace agreement, some form of a memorandum of understanding committing the parties to signing peace deal at a later stage. That will be very important. You talked about the context and the preceding years. I think it is absolutely vital to understand that prior to 2020, there was a stalemate. There was absolutely no possibility for these two countries to come to some sort of understanding. The war of 2020 changed everything. September 2023 was another critical moment, and the peace process itself, in a classical sense of the word, was actually initiated by Baku in March 2022.
And we'll go into more detail a little bit later, but just on that issue of the potential leasing or oversight of this corridor, for our viewers, can you just explain a little bit more about how that could possibly work?
Well, first of all, I think that the Armenian side so far has been incredibly ambiguous about this particular proposal. When the idea first voiced by Tom Barrack, US ambassador to Turkey and special envoy to Syria, it was very difficult to decipher what he said. What he said was that America could be interested in this, but reality is that initially Armenians rejected this proposal. And then they said some form of third-party control involving American commercial operator managing that particular section of overland passage connecting Azerbaijan's mainland with Nakhchivan exclave via Armenia is a possibility. When President Aliyev, you were there yourself, was asked about it, he said that it's a matter for Armenian leadership. As long as we are concerned in our sovereign territory, no section of our sovereign territory will be governed or will be controlled, will be leased out to any third party. So I think Azerbaijani demand is very clear. Azerbaijan wants unhindered, unobstructed access to Nakhchivan exclave. Azerbaijan wants that access to be secure. Azerbaijan does not want to see Armenian physical control there. As President Aliyev said, he said, and I quote, that our citizens and cargo shouldn't face any Armenian border guard. But to what extent Azerbaijan will be happy with the US proposal? Potentially, but not necessarily. But in the light of what's happening, I can't exclude any possibility.
Very interesting indeed. Okay, let's bring in Oubai now. Oubai in Washington for us. We're anticipating something, Oubai, aren't we? Although it's not exactly clear precisely what is going to take place. You're there, you're in Washington. What's happening right now?
Well, there's a sense here in Washington that history could be in the making with yet another peace agreement that President Trump is helping to make a reality. That is the hope here in Washington, D.C., as President Trump is expected to host the Prime Minister of Armenia, Nikol Pashinyan, and the President of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, two countries that had once been in conflict with one another for decades and are continuing their peace negotiations. But like with all peace negotiations, it's those last final steps that are so critical. And the White House, according to reports, is hoping to provide their good offices to help push the two sides into those final steps that hopefully could lead to a lasting and sustainable peace between the two countries. We have seen the White House and President Trump use a similar with other conflicts in the past, such as the one between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And the White House very keen in being able to shepherd the ongoing peace negotiations towards a final outcome. So it is very significant also that this takes place merely weeks after we heard directly from President Aliyev in the city of Khankendi praising President Trump's legacy for peace and saying that President Trump winning the American election will help bring about more stability in the region, also calling for greater bilateral cooperation between Baku and Washington. So this will also be an opportunity for those two countries to strengthen their strategic relationship, given the fact that previously, under the previous administration here in the White House, those relations between the United States and Azerbaijan were just so dismal, according to Azerbaijani officials. So potentially here we could be seeing history on a number of fronts, as well as a new page in bilateral American-Azerbaijani relations.
Yeah, very interesting. Oubai, just stay with us if you can. Let's talk, Orkhan, about the personalities, the men, the relationship involved. Three very different individuals all coming together. We've seen President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan, they met last month in the UAE. I think pretty much every body language expert and political analyst in the region was scrutinizing every moment of that. A positive meeting,
very nice optics,
to some degree unexpected. Since then, we've seen this relationship between President Trump and President Aliyev develop. We've seen positive supportive messages for each other expressed publicly. Just give us your analysis of the relationship between each of the three leaders.
Yes, indeed. When it comes to President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan, their relations were incredibly bad after 2020, after the war. There was a moment of truth for this country, for Azerbaijan. Armenia was defeated roundly, and naturally for some considerable time their relations, the optics coming from their meetings were not very positive. We remember 2021, we remember their meetings in Sochi, in Moscow. Actually, Prime Minister Pashinyan was so in a bad state of morale, of course, in 2020 November. He wasn't even part of that trilateral meeting, which effectively led to 10 November declaration. But I think things started to change probably step by step by late 2021, and there was a moment in October 2022 when Azerbaijan and Armenia signed this was so-called Prague Declaration, wherein Armenia recognized Azerbaijan states, or including Karabakh. And then, of course, things started to change. I think there is a clear realization on the Azerbaijani side that Prime Minister Pashinyan, for all his faults and mistakes and uncertainty or chameleonic nature of his personality as it is being understood in this country and many other countries, is still probably a man of vision when it comes to the future of his country. But President Aliyev said something very interesting during Newshour Global Media Forum. He said that Prime Minister Pashinyan said earlier that he should have recognized Azerbaijan's territory earlier than 2022. But it actually, President Aliyev's comment testifies to the way he perceives Armenian leader. He perceives the Armenian leader as a changing man, a man who cannot be fully trusted. And what President Aliyev said in Newshour was that there is no guarantee that he will not go back on his promise now. So we need a guarantee. There's an element of mistrust there, but the relations are developing, they're evolving, and evolving in the right direction. I think the optics coming from Abu Dhabi meeting were incredibly positive. When it comes to the relation between Prime Minister Pashinyan and President Donald Trump, I don't think there is any particular relationship. I don't think that President Trump has taken note of Prime Minister Pashinyan extensively. Armenian administration, government in Yerevan, was actively hoping for Biden's election in late 2024. And the defeat of Biden and victory of Donald Trump was a huge blow to the government of Nikol Pashinyan for a number of reasons. Because if you remember back in 2024, there was a massive pressure on Azerbaijan by the Biden administration, some of the governments in Europe, to sign a deal effectively on Armenian terms, to sign a draft peace agreement on Armenian terms. And Azerbaijan did not give in back then. Therefore, I think that Trump administration's relation with Azerbaijan is a completely different dimension, and we need to look at that very carefully. President Trump probably, I imagine, likes strong characters, figures like President Erdogan, people who can make a decision and stand by those decisions, and strong characters. And in President Aliyev, I imagine he has already discerned some of the key attributes that would make a great leader on the global stage. What President Aliyev thinks about Trump, I think it's very evident. He made it very clear during Newshour Global Media Forum.
And to some degree, some similarities in terms of worldview between the two men.
Yeah, there is a degree, and you attended presidential press briefing interview in early 2025. What President Aliyev believes that, yes, indeed, we are all different countries. There are some perhaps global universal values, but ultimately we should respect each other. We should not interfere in our internal affairs, in each other's internal affairs. This mutual respect, this sort of rejection of exporting your own values into other domains in order to sort of establish your own sphere of influence. These things are rejected by President Aliyev, and President Trump is not different in that particular respect. I would entirely agree with you in terms of there is a degree of commonality between those two leaders. They're operating in different spheres. President Trump is a president of the world's most important country. President Aliyev is a leader of the most important country in this region with a growing influence. But you see that in 2025, this year, the world is changing. Azerbaijan had been preparing for this change for some considerable time until early 2025. President Trump stands at the heart of this change now, and therefore, in this region, when you look at this wider landscape, Baku and Israel and US triangle, which is emerging, you see common interests in this region. They are based fundamentally on security, on predictability, and also wider energy picture. And in that sense, there is a degree of commonality as well. And also, in terms of personalities, the vision, adherence to some sort of cultural values, supposedly, there also one may find lines of similarities.
And just zoning in on President Trump, Oubai, just give us a sense of what President Trump actually wants out of this. Obviously there is inherent worthiness of bringing peace between two nations. There is the case of the potential Nobel Peace Prize. But beyond that, what is this administration, this Trump administration, looking for from this region, medium and long term?
Well, we have heard from President Trump on a number of occasions that he wants his presidential legacy to be first and foremost to be remembered as a peacemaker, as a president that has ended wars and that has not started any new wars. And we have seen that with the level of involvement of the White House with a number of international crises from Pakistan, India, Thailand, Cambodia, Central Africa, and with the Middle East, and of course with the ongoing negotiations with Moscow and Kyiv. So this could potentially be another addition to that legacy, as well as within the overall context of the Abraham Accords. That was, of course, the landmark peace deal negotiated by the White House between Arabian Gulf countries and the state of Israel. In addition, of course, the White House has a number of geostrategic equities, such as energy security to Europe, of which Azerbaijan plays a critical role. Now, the United States does not really have a military presence or in this part of the world in the South Caucasus, but let's not forget that President Trump had just dispatched his special envoy, Steve Witkoff, to Moscow, and that strategic positioning of Azerbaijan in the South Caucasus with its relationship with Turkey and relationship with Ukraine makes that country incredibly important to the White House. So it is part of President Trump's broader peace legacy to add yet another notch in the string of successes and involvements of President Trump's administration in ending long-term conflicts, as well, of course, as geopolitical interests of the United States when it comes to energy and when it comes to the wider Eurasian continent as well. Of course, let's not forget the fact that this meeting between Azerbaijan and Armenia is taking place in this White House behind me and not taking place in Moscow and Paris, also is sending loud signals to Moscow that the United States is the one that is playing the more preeminent role in what used to be Russia's backyard.
Yeah, it's a very, very good point indeed. Orkhan, amongst many other things, you're an international lawyer. Just give us a sense of the technicalities that could emerge over the coming days, what this deal or any potential deal might generate in terms of new initiatives, specific incentives, restrictions. Is there any way at this point of sort of sketching out what we think any potential deal might look like?
Well, Azerbaijan made very clear, and Armenia sort of reluctantly has acquiesced with this, that there are two fundamental extra treaty obstacles that need to be fulfilled for that deal to be signed. And what are those obstacles? One is Armenia's constitution, which contains territorial claims towards Azerbaijan. That needs to be fixed, that needs to be sorted out by means of referendum. That's not going to happen now, this year, next year. The second obstacle is the dissolution of the OSCE Minsk group by means of joint application. Without those two conditions being fulfilled, there will be no peace agreement in a classical sense in a legal sense of the word. There will be no agreement on interstate relations and peace being signed. That will not happen. That is a proper peace treaty in the sense of international law.
So, okay, sorry, so it's not just about what is agreed over the next few days. It's also about how enforceable, how sustainable are those elements over the coming months and years.
Yep. What we could do, we could initial those provisions, those agreed provisions. Initialing provisions of a given peace deal does not amount to signing it. It does not require any ratification. It does effectively mean that parties express their firm commitment to those provisions. There's an obligation to sign that deal when the right circumstances emerge. So that will create a certain degree of legal certainty and framework within which Azerbaijan and Armenia, without signing that final comprehensive peace deal, could actually attain some other goals in connection with connectivity, for example. The opening of communications may take place before the signing of peace deal. It's technically possible. At least some progress could be attained. Some progress could be attained in terms of border delimitation and demarcation. So at this stage, what will happen effectively on the 8th of August? That's my reading of the situation on the basis of what I have heard, what I believe is likely to happen. There will be some form of memorandum of understanding on basic principles. Perhaps I imagine that document to be of bilateral nature. This is one thing. That will commit sides to signing peace at a later stage. It could be referred to as protocol of intent or letter of intent as well. Some analysts could refer to it as a peace deal, but it will not be a classical peace treaty that we understand as international lawyers. What else could happen? I imagine also there could be some sort of a trilateral declaration involving US President as well about some sort of strategic framework. But the reality here is that I think there are things we can attain now, and those things really relate to some form of human-to-human contact, opening of communications, and there we need to attain some form of progress. And there will be some kind of external reaction to this as well. I'm sure earlier, I think Oubai in his comment mentioned about Russia. Azerbaijani-Russian relations leave a lot to be desired. Armenian-Russian relations are not perfect either. What will be external reaction to this? There will be some sort of reaction. I think that the region is changing. Quite clearly, some form of regional ownership is taking over this region, and Azerbaijan is a leading figure within this process. What is very certain to everybody, including myself, that this process is both bilateral and also irreversible. And US will get some credit, but that credit will not undermine the bilateral nature of the process.
Very interesting indeed. Gentlemen, thank you both very much indeed. Orkhan Amashov here in Baku and Oubai Shahbandar in Washington, DC. So, as time ticks down then between now and Friday evening, the anticipation builds. Big questions still remain. Will the meeting definitely happen? What will be the conditions, the incentives, the subcomponents of any White House brokered peace deal? And crucially, what will all that mean for continued prosperity as well as peace across this region? Well, whether it's via TV, app, social media or website, please do keep your eyes on AnewZ as this important story develops. And from all of us here, thanks for being with us.